Welcome back to the channel, nerds. My name is Oz, short for Osborne, aka Mr. Winters, aka your 2023 first and last annual Riot Mode Dev Challenge 10th place finalist. Being that this is episode 2 of the Silent Hill F review, I am legally required to say that if you haven't seen episode 1, you need to go back and watch that one first, because if you don't,
Pyramid Head is gonna come for your foreskins.
We also made a separate comment response video for that one, so check that one out too, I guess. Anyway, there is no reason for a preamble this time around, so let's just get to the goddamn video. The genres that influence Silent Hill F are what I would refer to as gameplay rich, meaning they deploy robust, mechanically engaging moment-to-moment gameplay with an emphasis on rewarding the player for overcoming their respective challenges while offering the flexibility to make meaningful moment-to-moment choices. However, Silent Hill F is one of the least robust, mechanically punishing, unrewarding, and needlessly inflexible gameplay experiences I've ever had, made by developers who clearly didn't understand the genres that influence them. Those genres being classic survival horror, that being games built on the framework established by Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil, and Silent Hill, modern survival horror, referring to games built within the framework established by Resident Evil 4, and the all-too popular Souls-like genre. Simplest example right up front is the limited inventory system. A limited inventory, as it pertains to survival horror, is explicitly designed to push players towards making the aforementioned meaningful moment-to-moment choices. You find a new key item, but your inventory is full. Do you use a healing item or discard precious ammo to make room? If not, the only other choice may be to backtrack to an item box and store some of your gear. But what if there's a hallway full of dickheads between you and said item box? Now you run the risk of getting hit or spending more ammo than you would have discarded to make room for the new item, ammo that you might prefer to save for a more difficult challenge in the future. Or maybe the meaningful choices would have been made before all that. Let's say you're at the item box. You recently acquired the key item you need to make progress, but the area you're heading into is a complete mystery. What do you take and what do you leave behind? How much inventory space do you think you need to leave for yourself to get through the next stage of your journey as safely and efficiently as possible? Classic survival horror was founded on this principle. Bring with you only what you need to survive while maximizing how efficiently you explore and find new key items and resources. This is fundamental. So if you're going to limit the player's inventory, there has to be a reason for it. So ask yourself this question as we proceed. Why did the developers choose to limit the player's inventory in Silent Hill F? Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to it.
Let's take a look at Silent Hill 2, right?
Sure.
Do you see my pink screen?
I see it. Let's go.
Okay, so this is like the start, and then you go down a line, and then eventually you get to the apartments, then you go, woo, 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 where am I going? Oh, no, which way do I go? And then you continue on, right? Mm-hmm. Then you get to the hospitals next, right? Mm-hmm. Then you go, woo, 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 gameplay, exploration. It's even a little bit bigger now, and then you carry on, and so on, right?
Yeah.
In Silent Hill F, you go this way, and then, oh, there's a piece of candy. 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 And then you get to the school, and you go, oh, piece of candy. Oh, piece of candy. And it continues like that.
Yeah. You forgot to mention the few little sections where you go off the beaten path and there will be actually more than one turn that you'll take down a street or an alleyway. But instead of finding any items there's just a couple of enemies to ambush you and you have to fight them and you don't get anything for it. Yeah, right there. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
There's no loot. You don't find anything. You just get ambushed, and you potentially lose resources while taking part in the unbearable shit combat. It's barely a half a tier above the Callisto Protocol in terms of linearity. It's insane.
Hold on. Let me do one for the Callisto Protocol.
Yeah.
There you go.
The map may look like this, but it might as well look like this. With a few incredibly short-lived exceptions, this game is almost on par with the Callisto Protocol in terms of linearity. And I know that linearity is a dirty word when it comes to gaming, so let me clarify my stance on this. A game being linear isn't inherently a bad thing. At the core, all video games have the player going from point A to point B. But depending on the mechanics, level design, and gameplay focus, developers can trick you into thinking you're doing more than you really are, which is going from point A to point B. It's like a magic trick. Resident Evil 4 is one of the most linear games I've ever played, yet it remains to this day one of the greatest video games of all time, because the moment-to-moment gameplay is so gripping that you hardly notice that 75% of the time the actual level design is just press W to win. The less engaging the game, the less effective the illusion. Thus, the press W to win exploration is much more obvious. On the other end of the linearity spectrum, you have classic survival horror, Metroidvanias, and everything in between. These games emphasize exploration with a deep sense of discovery. Everyone knows that feeling of entering a once locked door and winding up in a place you've previously explored, giving you a deeper sense of how that world is put together. I literally call it the Resident Evil moment. Except for that first elevator ride back to Firelink Shrine, that is a Dark Souls moment. But regardless of the linearity or the depth of exploration, if the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't engaging, the level and world design may only exacerbate the issues. Back to Silent Hill F, the map may look like you have some real exploring to do, but there is always only one way to go, the few exceptions being certain areas within the Dark Shrine, which have a central hub and multiple paths branching off of them. But each path is mandatory and they don't connect to one another in any meaningful way. It's the illusion of exploration, but unlike Resident Evil 4 or another game that might disguise its linearity with gripping moment-to-moment gameplay, outside of the final gauntlet of the game, the Dark Shrine is home to some of the worst gameplay in the entire Silent Hill franchise. And that is saying something. And the developers were obviously aware of that because they abbreviated nearly all of the events in the Dark Shrine on New Game Plus, allowing players to bypass a portion of the tedium, and then in patch 1.10, they threw in the towel entirely and added an actual skip feature for even more of the Dark Shrine, removed several enemies across the game overall, and reduced the amount of unskippable combat encounters. It's not even just me saying the game is bad anymore. This is the developers agreeing with me. Now, keep all that in mind because we're gonna come back to it. Resource management and the limited resources thereof are not only another survival horror staple, but the core feature that binds the genre together. But kind of like the limited inventory, the resource management should present meaningful moment-to-moment choices, and this is probably the closest the game gets to doing that, however in the most artificial way. Most of the consumables you find have a very low cap on how much you can carry per stack, but you can carry more than one stack of each item, so theoretically you can carry fewer healing items and more toolkits to repair your weapons, or if you're confident in your durability management, maybe you only keep one stack of toolkits to keep an extra slot available for healing items. Feels like classic survival horror, right? Keep that in mind, we're gonna come back to it. Silent Hill F offers the most bare-bones progression systems a video game can possibly muster. It's just incremental upgrades to Hinako's 3 primary stats or resources with a rising cost: health, stamina, and sanity. That's literally it. In order to pay for these upgrades, you have to spend a very limited currency, in this case faith, and an even more limited resource in these Emma portraits. You acquire faith by offering trinkets and consumables at the Hokora shrines, which act as your save points, and the Emmas are hidden throughout the game. There are about 7 or 8 of these per playthrough. You also need faith to purchase Omamori charms, which are how you create your actual build. So this is where all of these systems begin to crash into one another to form the foundation of the unbearable gameplay loop that is Silent Hill F. But keep all that in mind because we're going to come back to it. Melee-only combat is the core conceit of the gameplay in Silent Hill F, and it is driven by 3 different weapon classes: light, medium, and heavy, each with their own pros and cons. Light weapons are faster and do high damage, but at a much greater durability cost. Medium weapons are the bread and butter of the game, being the most readily available and flexible in their moveset with the most efficient durability expenditure. Heavy weapons offer defensive utility through the use of the focus mechanic and deliver very high damage with a very high cost to durability and are incredibly slow. This is the freshest thing that Silent Hill F is offering the genre of survival horror. Melee-only combat with breakable weapons. Once a weapon breaks, it's gone forever, so you'll have to use toolkits, which are actually in short supply, to repair the ones you want to keep with you. I found the weapon and toolkit distribution in this game to be pretty well balanced, which is a genuine compliment that I can pay to Silent Hill F, one of the few. However, the enemy variety is very limited, the actual weapon variety is even more limited, and the overall combat variety reaches its peak so early on that outside of the story bosses, you have nothing new to experience after the first third of the game. And that says nothing of the unbearably inconsistent nature of the combat itself. So, melee only. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely, but this ain't it. These are the limited combat options available to the player. Here is the basic attack combo for each weapon class. Here is the heavy attack for each weapon class. Here is the focus attack for each weapon class. Here is the counter attack for each weapon class. As you can see, these attacks offer barely any variety whatsoever. Keep this in mind as we continue. As I said before, we are dealing with durability and breakable weapons. Durability expense is usually reflective of the damage done. More damage equals more durability loss. Easy enough. Using the focus mechanic with a heavy weapon equipped will reduce damage taken, and with the right Omamori, a more defensive playstyle is possible. Although really all it does is make the already slow, tedious combat feel slower and more tedious, because focus attacks have to be charged, but the primary use of the focus is actually to find openings for counterattacks. Only certain enemy attacks are counterable, and the counterattack itself does the highest amount of damage per durability spent, meaning you do higher damage than a normal attack with less durability spent than a normal attack, which means this is the most efficient attack you have, which means you should prioritize it over everything else because this is a survival horror game and your resources are limited. However, the enemy attacks that you can actually counter are so inconsistent that it makes the one deterministic attack you have completely unreliable. What do I mean by inconsistent? Well, each enemy has basically one attack that can be countered. Their moveset is limited enough that these attacks are quite common. Unfortunately, and I have no fucking clue why this is even a thing, they are only counterable when you see this chromatic effect play out during the attack. So, if they do the attack that you know to be counterable, that you have countered 100 fucking times before, this one time it may not be. The tutorial says that the effect won't trigger if you're attacking or dodging, but my playstyle at a certain point was built around counterattacks. So I would just be standing and waiting for my opening, read the attack and go to counter but do a heavy attack instead, miss and get hit. At first I thought I was doing something wrong. Then I started watching other people's playthroughs and realized it was happening to them as well. And this happens even when you're using your focus. So it is either a deliberate design choice on part of Neobards to make the only counterable attacks one of the most effective and only deterministic ways to deal with this shit combat, completely random, or it's a bug that is yet to be fixed, but considering it was left out of patch 1.10, which included some pretty serious additions to the game, I feel confident in my conclusion that it was intentional. And the main reason this is an issue is because the counter window is just as tight, if not tighter, than the dodge. So if you read the attack and try to counter, but it's not one of those times you're allowed to, you're just gonna get hit. You literally won't have time to do anything else. It just doesn't feel right. Then we have the dodge itself, which I don't even know where to start with this fucking thing. So first of all, the stamina consumption in this game makes the evil within look like Sebastian Castellanos is using a fucking Game Shark. And even after the stamina buff in patch 1.10, it still feels so incredibly punishing. I know people are going to comment on this, so let's get it out of the way right now. Regardless of how much stamina you have, if you perform a perfect dodge, your stamina bar is fully replenished, which is actually a cool mechanic. In theory, since you can still be hit during a perfect dodge, which may or may not be a bug, but how do you even tell in a game that feels this inconsistent? But even worse, the recovery on the perfect dodge is so long you can still get grabbed or hit during that as well, because the amount of downtime in the gameplay due to recovery animations or long animations in general is so unreasonable. Actually, let's talk about that for a second. So this is the first of many examples where the Souls-like influence on Neobards superseded their understanding of why the system or mechanic worked in its original context. This is why you can't just take gameplay elements from different genres and mash them together like toys fucking. You have to understand why they actually worked in their respective genres. Committing to these animations with every action taken is a concept borrowed directly from the Souls-like genre. Even healing, the most critical action you will often take, is an animation that requires thought and commitment. This one in particular exacerbated by the fact that there are far too many different consumables and each one has a slightly different animation. If you need to heal in a Souls-like game, it's because you made a mistake and have effectively lost a turn. The next opening, where you would theoretically be able to attack, now has to be spent on health recovery. And the more complex the combat encounter, the less frequent these moments are. However, if for some reason you were to die, with obvious exceptions, you can pick up fairly close to where you left off, but with more knowledge, more experience, and more importantly for later in this discussion, more power. Whereas dying in Silent Hill F can potentially set you back far longer. And unlike in a Souls-like where you only drop your souls upon death, souls, for the layman, being your experience for leveling, which also doubles as your in-game currency. In Silent Hill F, you effectively drop everything when you die because you are literally reloading a save. And unlike classic survival horror, where upon death you have deeper knowledge of the critical path, important item locations, and how to bypass certain enemies so you can get that progress back in a far shorter amount of time, Silent Hill F, with its modern survival horror influence, is so linear with nearly unavoidable combat so frequent that knowledge and experience barely make a difference if you have to try again. Dying in this game means you basically have to deal with every single enemy again and find every single item again. But unlike most modern survival horror, the linear exploration in Silent Hill F is so fucking boring and the combat isn't remotely rewarding or fun to engage with. So being forced into it artificially like this game does constantly is just ridiculous. And here is one of the core reasons why. There is a concept in gaming I refer to as the death spiral, which refers to playing defensively during a critical moment, i.e. healing, dodging, blocking, parrying, reviving a party member, etc., and being punished for that choice and put immediately back in the position you were just in. Back to Silent Hill F, when you're locked into that death spiral, there are so many more factors with which to contend, and the character animations play a huge part in this. But we're also finally going to bring in some of the previously mentioned mechanics. However, each one of these elements is greatly exacerbated by one another, so it's hard to stay focused on one, so just bear with me. Repositioning and/or running isn't always reliable because every enemy in the game has an attack that can either hit you or grab you from an unreasonable distance, and if you reposition to heal, you can and probably will get hit during any of the healing animations or their recovery time because no distance is far enough, and most of the time you're artificially locked into a very small arena until all of the enemies have been defeated. And on the subject of animations, why in the Silent Hill fuck does swapping weapons have to be such a cumbersome act? When I talk about Silent Hill F being rigidly designed, this is one of the best examples. It's a deliberate choice on part of the developers to make you think about and commit to each action for better or worse, but it is completely infertile ground for emergent gameplay or even simply maximizing damage in a way that feels satisfying. Here is a very easy example of why this bothers me so much, and an even better example of how Neobards shit the bed when it came to the Souls-like influence in Silent Hill F. In a Souls game, when you break an enemy's stance, you open them up to a critical attack. Not only is this a great way to exert some control over the flow of combat, but depending on your build, you can get some incredible damage from critical attacks. Even in the most challenging Souls games with the most complex and fast-paced combat encounters, you have more than enough time to perform other actions during this window. One of the most significant being weapon swapping. Since some weapons, like daggers, have higher crit damage values, but others have higher stance damage values, it is very common to use one weapon for stance breaking and keep a crit weapon in your back pocket to switch to for critical attacks. Fast forward to Silent Hill F, and the best way to maximize your damage output is to just swing as many times as you can with your currently equipped weapon after you've staggered an enemy before they get back up, as opposed to something more intuitive like staggering an enemy with a counterattack from a medium or heavy weapon, and then swapping to a light weapon and shredding them during the stagger window. But swapping weapons during the stagger window is so needlessly time-consuming that you basically waste it all trying to switch to a different weapon. It is comically inflexible. The dodge doesn't get any iframes, and since Hinako, the 105-pound high school track star, moves like a fucking sack of shit-covered bricks, even if you execute a perfect dodge, you might not go in the precise direction you were hoping. Or maybe you are going in the direction you were hoping, but the area isn't safe anymore. This animation is also uninterruptible. Thanks, Neobards! In almost every encounter, you are dealing with more than one enemy at a time, and they're incredibly aggressive, which in the right context I'm completely on board with, but Silent Hill F doesn't give you any straightforward AoE options. Combat is designed for 1v1, and that's fucking it. The medium weapons are the only consistent way to hit multiple enemies at once, but it is a very situational and time-consuming, high-risk, low-reward combat loop of rounding them up and literally hoping, because again, it's not a guarantee that one of them does an attack that you can counter. This also requires you to not be using the lock-on, so you can basically aim a certain way that allows you to hit multiple targets, since that's the only time you have any control over the camera. Which brings me to my next point. This might be one of, if not the worst camera systems I've experienced in a video game in the last decade. In small rooms and hallways, the camera completely shits itself, and even in more open areas, it's still difficult to see everything you need to. Enemies pincer you, spawn behind you, jump over obstacles, and chase you, and they don't stop attacking or chasing you whether or not you're looking at them. Which brings me to my next point. Enemies are just straight up faster than you, especially these dickheads. If you try to run from them, you will get hit. There's no if, and the level design is so narrow most of the time that if you try to run while keeping the camera facing behind you, so you can actually keep an eye on what's happening, you will get stuck and you will get hit. And exacerbating all of these issues, this might be one of the most poorly implemented stamina systems in any video game I have ever played. The stamina cost of actions feels bad even after character upgrades and game patches. The stamina recovery speed is unforgivably slow. Even with stamina boosting Omamori, it is so unnecessarily punishing that I opted at several points to just use the Daisy Omamori, which gives infinite stamina at the cost of dying in a single hit, and since surviving combat was already such a gamble sometimes, I figured it was a fine trade-off. And you don't realize how artificial the difficulty is in this game until you equip this fucking thing, by the way. Because infinite stamina just makes the game functional in the most rudimentary way. It's not overpowered, it just makes Silent Hill F feel the way a video game should feel. So any action that is not executed with the highest level of mastery can almost instantly lock you into that death spiral. Now, this is probably not as much of a thing on story mode or, as of patch 1.10, casual mode, the theoretically even easier mode. But that honestly just makes the difficulty pool seem a bit more obtuse than it already did. On launch, we had story and hard for action difficulty, and story, hard, and Lost in the Fog difficulty for puzzles. After beating the game once, you would unlock Lost in the Fog for action difficulty. Story difficulty, historically, is reserved for the most casual players, those who want to experience the story without a lot of resistance from the game. That would typically be followed by normal, then hard, and then whatever extreme difficulty the developers deem appropriate. Sometimes hard mode is the highest a game will go, and other times it might have a slightly different name, like survival difficulty or something like that. But casual and story are synonymous with easy mode. So now we just have two easy modes. Due to the obtuse nature of the difficulty pool and lack of variety, I, like many others, went with hard mode. But I would recommend to anyone that wants to play this for the first time to play on story or the newly added casual for the action, because there is no reward for overcoming the artificial challenges this game presents, and then whatever puzzle difficulty you feel capable of. To round off my list of complaints regarding the Souls-like influence on the gameplay of Silent Hill F, we have number 1, unintuitive enemy ambushes, i.e. enemy placements designed explicitly to catch you off guard, housed in areas where the level design defies any and all logic so as to prevent players from reading the ambush before it happens. Number 2, weapons bouncing off walls. I am not asking for battlefield levels of destructibility, I am simply asking for the tiniest bit of flexibility. This was obviously done to make the gameplay more punishing, much like your standard Souls-like, but what the developers have ultimately accomplished with this element in particular is making an already rigid combat system feel even less flexible to an almost comical degree, while simultaneously making the world itself feel more artificial. Have any of these nerds actually swung a fucking sledgehammer in real life? In a Souls-like, all weapons, even shields, will typically bounce off walls, but thanks to the variety of weapon classes and movesets, you can always find a more effective secondary weapon to swap to during those more narrow encounters. But in Silent Hill F, every single weapon, with one exception we're going to talk about later, regardless of speed, have a nearly identical moveset and make fighting in small rooms and narrow corridors feel like absolute horseshit. Number 3, barely perceptible enemy telegraphing, including frame 1 attacks. Number 4, comically long enemy attack strings. Number 5, command grabs. Number 6, no iframes on door opening animations. Number 7, no iframes on jumping over obstacles. Number 8, repeated use of the game's worst enemies. Number 9, overindulgent multi-phase boss design. And number 10, the aforementioned completely broken camera system. These are the things NeoBards chose to take from the Souls-like genre, not the immaculate level and world design, emphasis on exploration, the robust combat system, weapon variety, build variety, multiple playstyles, layered progression systems, and the emergent gameplay that comes from all these elements working together in harmony. And unfortunately, we're not done yet. During the Dark Shrine segments, you are given weapons with infinite durability because the enemies in these sections are immortal. So if you don't get through the levels or solve the puzzles fast enough, you will have to continuously deal with the same enemies until you make progress, and they are some of the worst enemies in the game. Thanks, NeoBards! However, halfway through Silent Hill F, there is a pretty big shift in gameplay during these segments, wherein Hinako is stripped of her weapons and given the Fox Arm and super furry powers to accompany it. And here's the issue with this. The only real tension that could come from the moment-to-moment gameplay is all but abandoned at this point. Although this shift in gameplay has narrative significance, it ends up feeling far less meaningful because core gameplay elements are stripped away. The very limited weapon variety is reduced to a single weapon, and the weapon durability, which was the core of the resource management gameplay loop, which was already a non-issue during these sections, now has no hope of making an appearance. Which means any Omamori that provided benefits to those weapons or other playstyles also become completely useless. So what very little build variety, resource management, and combat variety this game offered is completely stripped away for these incredibly tedious gameplay sections. Serious question, why don't they have Omamori that are exclusive to the Dark Shrine? Omamori explicitly designed to modify the use of Hinako's furry powers. You could still have access to all the other Omamori as well, but offering some that modified or benefited the most boring, mindless aspects of the gameplay would have gone a long way to making this dogshit more tolerable. The artwork for each of the Omamori are fantastic, and there are so many animals represented slanted across them, but in this particular instance, I have to ask, why not a Fox Omamori? What if the Fox Omamori activated your furry trigger for a few seconds after a perfect dodge, or filled your furry meter by a small amount after a successful counterattack? Or what if it consumed your furry meter instead of health and sanity when you took damage? I know these are basic, but they're better than nothing, which is what Neobards gave us, and something is better than nothing, at least I thought it was. Or what if all 40 Omamori, or at least the more complex ones, had completely different effects in the Dark Shrine? Not only would this add some much needed depth and complexity to the least engaging gameplay moments, but it would reinforce the duality of the character through the actual gameplay mechanics. And you know these gameplay sections fucking suck Tarantula dick, because on New Game Plus they just straight up give you your furry powers from nearly the beginning of the game, and empower the few relevant mechanics to make these sections more tolerable. If that's not an admission of something, I don't know what is. So we've highlighted all the key gameplay features and their individual issues. Let's try to bring them all together now. The limited inventory serves no other function than to artificially gate how many resources the player has at any given time. However, since the only meaningful choice that can really be made as a result of this system while exploring is to either discard something permanently to make room for something else, or just straight up leave an item behind because you don't have room for it, the inventory and resource management devolve into a degenerate loop of backtracking to a Hokora shrine to offer up items for more faith in an effort to upgrade stats or buy Omamori so that the shitty gameplay can feel 1% less shitty, then backtracking again to retrieve the items you didn't have room for and repeating the process. But we've already encountered other problems. First up, this type of inventory system works far better in a game where you are backtracking across a more interconnected map. So the idea of leaving an item behind is only a temporary punishment. There's always that chance you'll be able to pick it up later. Having a limited inventory in a game that is constantly pushing you forward on a linear path just feels so unnecessary, but could have been mitigated by having item storage at the Hokora Shrine. But in this case, I mean less like the traditional item box and more like the item storage in a Souls-like, wherein if you are currently capped on how much you can carry, the item will then be transported to your storage for later retrieval. You would still be limited as you explore since you only have so many inventory slots at any given time, but you would at least have some choice as to what you bring with you. This would make things so much more flexible while still having the limitation of the inventory space itself. The other issue here, and quite possibly one of, if not at least my biggest issue with the design philosophy behind this game. Why don't enemies in Silent Hill F drop resources when they die? Seriously, I just think about it for a minute. Even if they just awarded a small amount of faith when killed, that would go such a long way to supplementing the power progression, which itself is artificially gated, but we'll get to that in a little bit. There is no incentive whatsoever in Silent Hill F to even engage with the combat. In classic survival horror, killing enemies was always a tactical decision. You spend 30 bullets to kill 3 enemies to make an area safer because you know you'll need to backtrack through there multiple times. The reward in this case is the peace and mind to explore the area safely on each pass. In modern survival horror, enemies drop resources upon death. Whether that's ammo, upgrade currency, or crafting resources, killing enemies serves a purpose. So even when fighting is optional, it's still incentivized. Let's take it a step further. The third, and possibly most significant influence on Silent Hill F is the Souls-like genre, and within that genre, combat is heavily incentivized. Enemies drop consumables, weapons, armor, and other resources, but most importantly, they award souls when killed. Even if they don't drop any other loot, because those items will usually have percentage-based drop rates, they always award souls. So now we have a game that is heavily incentivizing combat to the point where you are artificially forced constantly into some of the worst encounters these sadistic morons could fucking conjure, and there is literally no tangible in-game reward for overcoming these challenges. However, if enemies dropped faith when killed, you could purchase Omamori and upgrade Hinako's stats far more often, thus forming a cohesive gameplay loop. Then, due to the flexibility provided by our new item storage concept and additional faith acquired from the combat, perhaps the moment-to-moment resource management and exploration might not devolve into that degenerate backtracking / Scrooge McDuck resource loop I mentioned earlier. Or what about an Omamori charm that has this effect? That way you have the option to acquire more faith from the terrible combat, but would have to sacrifice one of your precious Omamori slots, trading a potential combat advantage for a supplementary faith gain. This, my dear viewer, would be an example of the aforementioned meaningful gameplay choices. While on the subject of the upgrade systems and the Omamori, and this is probably my second biggest issue with this game's design philosophy, I mentioned earlier the cost for upgrades, a Rising Faith cost for Omamori and a Rising Faith cost plus one of the rare Emma portraits for each stat upgrade. Stat upgrades are obvious. More health equals live longer, theoretically. More stamina equals do more shit. And more sanity equals more focus usage, which depending on the build might be useful, however niche. But the Omamori can actually modify your playstyle and allow for a higher degree of flexibility. It's not much, but it's something, and like I said earlier, something is better than nothing. At least I thought it was. Which makes it all the more tragic for you, and personally offensive to me, that the order in which you acquire the Omamori is fucking randomized. Yes, you find some out in the world, but with a few exceptions, these are incredibly niche. The ones that could theoretically have the biggest impact on your gameplay are either buried in the Hokora Shrine tied to that Rising Faith cost, only obtainable near the end of the game, or, and this is my personal favorite, only available in New Game Plus. I would need a flowchart to describe everything wrong with this system, but Silent Hill F melted my brain and I can't even draw straight lines anymore. I've started a GoFundMe to have my memory erased. Link in the description below. Remember to smash that like button! Also, don't forget to subscribe. Based on analytics I've actually never looked at, 69% of you still aren't subscribed. What the fuck is wrong with you? This combat is unbearable. Hell, it's barely functional most of the time. It falls apart under the slightest bit of pressure, and most importantly, it just isn't fun. The Omamori are capable of transforming the gameplay up to a point. However, of the 5 Omamori slots, you only start with 1, and then have to purchase the next 4 at an absurd rising cost, and these purchases require both Faith and Emma's, by the way. And worse than that, only the 2nd and 3rd slots are available on the first playthrough. I can't even believe I'm about to say this. The 4th slot is only purchasable in New Game Plus, and the 5th slot is only purchasable on New Game Plus 2, aka your 3rd fucking playthrough. And this is only if you have achieved different endings on each of the first 2 playthroughs. And the UFO ending is exempt from this condition. So the only reasonable way to modify your gameplay to a point where it might even be remotely tolerable is through a progression system that is artificially gated behind multiple playthroughs of a game that is way too fucking long to begin with. And by the time you've actually unlocked all this shit, you don't even need it anymore. I have never seen baseline power progression gated behind New Game Plus. It's just straight up not a thing. And the Omamori purchases being randomized is just the poop sauce on top of the poop from a butt sundae. And it's not like you have a list of Omamori that you can reference in-game at the Hokora Shrine or in the journal or something, so you at least have ones you can hope for. You don't even get that. Hope. You don't know what any of them are until you've unlocked them, and again, they are the only way to modify your gameplay. I'm gonna make this as clear as possible, and this is like game development 101. Power progression in video games should be a deterministic process, meaning you should be able to see, to a reasonable degree, the future possibilities and be able to make progress towards them. In a Souls-like, you might find a weapon or spell you really want to use, but you need to level a certain stat to be able to do so. That's deterministic. In modern survival horror, you can always see the progression path for weapons, stats, or skills, and start planning early on which route you want to go. Maybe they offer you the flexibility to refund the upgrades on a weapon so that you can upgrade something else and change your loadout mid-game. In Chronos: The New Dawn, you can literally get the full refund for everything you've spent on your weapons, but the process comes with a rising cost. However, not only is it a very low cost in the first place, considering the flexibility that it offers to the player, it is a perfectly acceptable implementation of a rising cost to player power. And when Bloober Team, the developers of Pedophile Apologist Simulator, are making better development choices than you are fucking cooked. And one of the reasons that this is all so frustrating is each mechanic and system are like one pass away from working. For the progression systems, just remove the faith cost from stat upgrades. You're already making a choice by spending one of the very few Emma portraits that are available per playthrough. So every time you find one, you know that the choice actually matters. Then for the Omamori, as far as I'm concerned, the rising faith cost is only justifiable if you know what you're getting. So either have an actual list players can choose from for the current rising cost, or have random Omamori for a much lower static cost. Or just make it a fucking shop menu where the cost is determined by the utility or the level of power each Omamori offers the player. None of these alternatives are perfect, but again, they are better than what Neobards did, which is literally nothing. And last time I checked, something was better than nothing. At least I thought it was. I try as hard as I can to find the right words to express myself to you guys. I know I sound like someone who might have a serious head injury, but I never like putting a perspective out there that I can't fully explain. But there are only so many ways to say that something just doesn't feel right, and the gameplay in Silent Hill F just doesn't feel right. And nothing is a clearer example of this than Why aren't enemy grabs interruptible? Like, which drunk fucking intern on this budget dev team thought it was a good idea to prevent players from breaking enemy grabs? You know, like in every other survival horror game ever made.
Or in every other Souls-like ever made.
Or in most other video games ever made.
They literally tell you in the tutorial that if you get grabbed, you can just eat shit and die. I seriously need to know the name of the person who came up with this so that I can put them in my poop note. It's like a death note, but instead of dying, you just shit your pants immediately. Anyway, here's why it's an issue. Number 1, enemy grabs are the hardest hitting attacks in the game. On hard mode, if you are not at full health at all times, one of these grabs can kill you instantly, which might cost you a lot of progress. And number 2, there are an absurd amount of enemy ambushes like the ones I mentioned earlier, and every single player on the planet Earth and beyond is going to get grabbed by one of these fucking things at some point, regardless of how cautious they are. Not to mention how much more difficult it becomes to juke an enemy grab when more than one enemy are going for grabs at the same time. Between the busted dodge, stamina, or recovery animations, you will get grabbed, which means it is just an absolute lack of respect for your fucking time. Between the enemy grabs, long tedious player animations, long tedious combat animations, long tedious linear exploration, and the explicit expectation to play through this unbearable pile of shit 3 to 4 full times in order to understand the full story, I cannot remember the last time I played a game that had so little respect for the player's time. Every time a developer comes out on social media prior to the release of their game and says something like, oh, our game has 200 achievements and over 400 hours of content and multiple endings, and you gotta play it multiple times to get the full story and blah, blah, blah. There's always people in the comments that are like, I'll work 48 hours fucking day, okay? I don't got time to play this pansy-ass game. You need to make a game for me. Like, where the fuck are those guys for Silent Hill F? We need them now more than ever. Back to enemy grabs. This game already has a perfect system for dealing with these attacks that feeds directly into the resource management that not only this genre is known for, but this game specifically is built on. I will now turn your attention to the remake of one of the most influential games in the genre, without whom Silent Hill F might not even exist.
Resident Evil 4.
The biggest addition to the remake of Resident Evil 4 was the parry mechanic that was then balanced using a weapon durability system kind of like Silent Hill F. And one of the decisions players would have to make throughout the game was whether to mash out of an enemy grab at the cost of health, take the damage like an absolute beta, or use the knife to get out of the grab at the cost of a large amount of durability. Which was important because if your durability dropped to 0, the knife would be unusable until you were able to repair it with the assistance of the merchant. So why in the Silent Hill fuck is that not a thing here? As I said earlier, weapon and toolkit distribution is very well balanced even on the highest difficulty, so giving players a choice between taking the damage from a grab or spending the weapon durability might have actually added some choice or challenge to this game that didn't feel completely artificial. Or shit, what about Omamori charms that actually interact with enemy grabs? If Neobards need to satisfy their demented lust for wasting the player's time, they could at least add some mechanical depth to it. What about a honeybee Omamori that just added this mechanic to your toolkit, allowing you to get out of an enemy grab at the cost of a large amount of durability? This would pair nicely with the Otter Omamori, allowing you to swap weapons after the grab and get some of that durability back after defeating the enemy. Or kind of like the Fox Omamori I mentioned earlier, let's give these charms a bit more thematic relevance. What about a Red Spider Lily Omamori that did damage to the enemy during the grab as well? Because red spider lilies are poisonous. This could be even more useful on New Game Plus if you're trying to avoid using the capsules, thus limiting your healing options by pairing it with the Tanuki Omamori, converting the grab damage to sanity damage instead while doing damage to the enemy with the Red Spider Lily effect. Do you see how easy it is to create mechanical depth when you actually give a shit? However, while it is a fun exercise to sit and think about what could have been, we have to remember that that is not the game that Neobards gave us. The gameplay in Silent Hill F is so tedious that it wouldn't matter. The artificial challenge is all there is to overcome because the combat is just not engaging. The limited exploration is either unrewarding, pointless, or in many cases punishing. How many extra fucking hands would you need to count the amount of times you went slightly off the critical path hoping to find something, anything that felt like an actual tangible reward, only for the game to sneak attack judo chop you square in the fucking ass bone? And we still haven't even fully addressed the criminal lack of variety in the combat. Functionally, every regular enemy feels nearly identical to deal with, and this is exacerbated by how homogenized the weapons are. The combat in this game would completely collapse in on itself if they introduced literally any other weapon type that didn't just swing or swung. The Naginata is the weapon with the most distinct moveset, and it's really fun to use, but you only have it for like 5 fucking minutes before Hinako unlocks her furry trigger. Why couldn't we get the Naginata for the rest of the game? Give it durability too, make it something we have to manage as well. Or what about this cool interchangeable mace on a change thing that Sakuko uses? Why couldn't we unlock that after defeating her? Think about Sakuko's moveset. How much fun would it be to have some of these attacks? Let's remind everybody again using a very relevant comparison. Or, and please hear me out on this one, what about fucking ranged attacks?
It's 1960s Japan. You're not going to have a gun.
A lack of guns is no excuse for a lack of weapon or combat variety. And you don't necessarily need a ranged weapon to do ranged damage. I already mentioned the Naginata, which offers a ton of range compared to the rest of the weapons in the game, and acquiring Sakuko's weapon after defeating her would give you both a ranged attack and an AoE attack, which this game sorely needs. Also, have you ever just thrown a hammer? Or, and hear me out on this one too, a fucking bow and arrow. The bow and arrow did not carry the same strict weapon classification during the time period in which the game was set. Kyudo, the traditional Japanese martial art of archery, was practiced for both sport and cultural reasons, and bows and arrows would have been available to some people during this time period. So even within the narrative and cultural limitations that these developers chose, there was plenty of room for a more flexible approach to the combat systems and mechanics. The writer and developers chose this time period and these cultural limitations, and I believe that limitation should breed creativity, not act as an immutable obstacle. And my olive branch for having the option of ranged combat through bows and arrows would be, make the arrows extremely powerful, but extremely limited. Make it clear to the player that the quiver full of arrows found with the ceremonial bow are the only arrows in Ebisugaoka. Then there could be Omamori to bolster the use of the bow, it would have its own focus attack, and all of that other stuff. Having this option available for players even in such a limited form could completely transform the moment-to-moment gameplay. Unfortunately, none of this is a thing. But if you want to do a melee-only combat system, give us some interesting fucking weapons. But even the new game plus unlockables are more basic-ass weapons you just swing. It's so uninspired. Unlockable post-game weapons are a staple of the survival horror genre. And while there are often different unlockable weapons that have their own unique condition for unlocking, there's always at least one that you just kind of get for beating the game. And that's supposed to be your ticket to have some fun after you just got done getting your balls kicked in for 15 hours. But because this game was explicitly designed to be played upwards of 4.5 times, both unlockable weapons still require some additional work because Neobards and Ryukishio 7 had a goddamn story to tell, so they baked the new game plus exclusive Sacred Sword into the actual story. There is a huge build-up to it, and when you finally get it, it's just a little bit stronger than your regular weapons, and that's it. It's slow and lumbering like anything else and just barely outdamages the fucking sledgehammer. And in order to get it, you have to take part in a game-spanning side quest with missable items. So if you reach a point of no return and miss any of these key items, I guess you're not getting it until your third playthrough. And even worse than that, once you unlock it on the next New Game Plus cycle, you don't actually start with it. You have to go find it again. Sure, you don't have to do the full side quest, but it's a couple hours into the next playthrough before you can get to it, so you still have to deal with the combat at its most tedious one way or another. It's like they exercised the spirit of New Game Plus from the survival horror genre and just took turns beating it with a baseball bat. But I guess that's Silent Hill F in a nutshell, right? The spirit of Silent Hill, the spirit of psychological horror, the spirit of survival horror, the spirit of New Game Plus sucked out by a cordless Dyson V8 and mashed into a fucking AAA paste. But even though there are more Silent Hill games on the horizon, Silent Hill F is the last Silent Hill game for me. Classic Collection gets released, shut up and take my money. Otherwise, I got a backlog to get to and a mountain of other games and scripts and videos that I'm way more excited to share with you guys. I do have plenty more to say about Silent Hill F, but I'm going to save that for future videos, discussions, and live streams. Thank you all again for joining me in my endless suffering. Please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies. Once again, my name is Oz, short for Osborne, aka Mr. Winters, and I'll see you guys in the next one.